Good afternoon. Thanks for making it out on a chilly day. I'm Ann Phibbs, Director of Education in the Office for Equity and Diversity. Welcome to Beyond Myth-Making and Appropriation, African Americans in Theater and Film, the fifth of 7 conversations that make up the Office for Equity and Diversity's Critical Conversations About Diversity and Justice series. I'm proud to say that I work closely with my colleague Claire Walter Marchetti on developing these. Claire is in Georgia right now, and so she's hopefully at her plan, since her mother doesn't have Wi-Fi, is to be at a public library watching us. So we hope you see us, Claire. She said she was going to work really hard to watch. The Critical Conversation series is co-sponsored by the university libraries. My colleague Jody Gray from the libraries is responsible for creating a list of further academic resources on each of our Critical Conversation topics, which you can link to on our Critical Conversations webpage. And Jody's in the back there, so I want to publicly thank Jody for all the work she does on this series. This is our 3rd year of offering these conversations, and we're excited to continue offering live streaming so that you can watch via our website in real time or at a later date, since they will be archived on our Critical Conversations webpage. I just got a request this week from a community group in Austin, Minnesota, asking for permission to use one of our recorded conversations for a program they were doing down there. It's very heartening to me as an educator to know that people are using these conversations across the state to continue important discussions about diversity and justice. We've also added an opportunity for you to provide feedback on this series. If you've signed in, we'll email a link to an online evaluation, or you can also access that on our webpage. As with all these conversations, we'll start with some discussion among our panelists and moderator, and then we'll move out to questions and answers from the audience. And I'm excited now to introduce someone, it's going to sound a little hokey, but it's true, that I really am proud to work for. She is my boss. But I'm very proud to work for Dr. Albert. Dr. Catrice Albert, our moderator, is the Vice President for Equity and Diversity here at the University of Minnesota. As the institution's Chief Diversity Officer, she's responsible for leading our efforts to reach the University of Minnesota's most ambitious diversity goals across all 5 campuses. In addition to her work on campus, Dr. Albert is also committed to and engaged in the local community. She currently serves on the Board of Directors for the Volunteers of America, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Penumbra Theater, and sits on the Education Subcommittee of the African American Leadership Forum. She is also a member of the Generation Next Leadership Council and the Minnesota Women's Economic Roundtable. No wonder I never see her. She is a busy woman. Prior to joining the University of Minnesota, Dr. Albert served for 8 years as the Chief Diversity Officer at Louisiana State University. She is the co-editor of 2 volumes, Racial Battle Fatigue in Higher Education, Exposing the Myth of Post-Racial America, and Trayvon Martin, Race and American Justice, Righting Wrong. I think you can tell she is ideal to be our moderator for today's important discussion. Please help me welcome Dr. Catrice Albert.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for joining us today. Today's conversation, I think, is going to be very powerful and very important. The topic is very near and dear to my heart, and as you heard in the bio, part of the draw to the Twin Cities and to the University of Minnesota from the subtropic culture of Louisiana was the ability to interact with Penumbra Theater, one of the longest running African American theaters in the country. And so I just have a passion for art, and I think that it can transform your life. It provides us the opportunity to see ourselves and see the experiences that we have reflected back at us from the actors. And I never lived my life in regret, but if I did, I would regret not knowing that arts administration was actually a job. I'm not as talented as some of our panelists here today, but I can do administration. So if I lived my life in regret, it would be that I didn't know that that was a career. Art has the power to bring people together and show us that we are part of a larger fabric. So it is my esteemed pleasure to be here with the panelists today, and we want to thank them already for taking time to be a part of this conversation. I also want to thank my colleague, Wendy Luge, who is the Dean of the Libraries, for this incredible partnership, and the Friends of the Library, who they are very focused in on equity and diversity for the university, and the partnerships with the community. So a few details before we get started. I'm going to ask the panelists in a moment to introduce themselves and talk about their connection to today's topic. And then I have a few other questions that I want them to respond to, but we want to make sure that we leave plenty of time for questions that emerge from the audience. So I'll ask each panelist that as the questions progress, that you not feel compelled to each answer all of them. I know that's going to be hard, but we do want to reserve time for the audience to ask questions and to give commentary.
It won't be hard for
Yeah. So the first question for all of the panelists to respond to is to first introduce yourself and please tell us more about your experience with the topic. Talk about your work as it relates to the intersection of the arts and the African American community and why you think it's so important.
I'm not sure if I turned on the microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ann.
So let's make sure that they're on. That one's on the bottom there. This one's on. And the green light's on. You're good to go.
And then please speak into the microphone each time you speak as we are being recorded.
Not ladies first? Dang. Okay. Good afternoon. Good. I'm glad y'all responded. I'm not doing that thing about I'm sitting here quiet. You have to be active. Harry Waters Jr. I'm a former student out here. Isela, hi, how are you doing? I teach at McAllister College, but I'm an actor. I'm a director. I'm a community activist. That's the stuff that I do. That's what makes me really, really happy. It's been my passion for many, many years. I've been in the Twin Cities, wow, 15 years now. I've been, not that head. I moved here after living and working in New York City, Los Angeles, San Francisco. Came here, went back to grad school in Madison, and before I finished, got a job here in the Twin Cities. One of my jobs that I actually had that I first arrived here was working at Penumbra Theater. I was an assistant director on a show of 7 guitars that they were doing in 2003. Also at the same time, I was working at the Playwrights Center. So I've been able to find this connection as an artist that works in so many different venues. One of the things that I really like are playwrights, which means I really like writers. And everybody in here, I'm assuming because you're all at this big institution, somehow is connected to writing and storytelling, because that's sort of the foundation of what we do. The artists, especially the artists in the black community that I'm always connected with, we're always so full of stories. And it's one of the things that we forget about. It's like, oh, it's art, it's theater. It's like, no, it's actually storytelling. All of you all are full of so many stories in so many different ways that are absolutely probably unique and fascinating. So I am really interested in hearing stories out of the community. I work a lot with the different community groups, and one of the ways that I work a lot is doing community-based theater. And that happens by creating story circles where we engage people on a topic. It could be homelessness, it could be masculinity, it could be disparities. People have their own experience, but the stories that they tell are then fabulously used to make theater. And then you cast the community in those roles. Then you have a community that's actually telling its own story, as opposed to me coming in and saying, well, this is a story you should know about. Working a lot with youth, and there's some youth I see here that I've seen a long time ago. It's amazing what happens when this place, Minnesota, you like run into people everywhere. Very oddly. There's a way that young people feel either marginalized or not heard, but when their voices are suddenly actualized, especially in communities of color and in communities, LGBT communities, different ability communities, it's fascinating how those links are made. As a black actor, and I use the term black actor as opposed to African American because I'm old and I grew up in the 70s, so you'll allow me to have that right. Thank you. I love you like somebody nodding because, yeah, hoot, Laurie! There's a history that I have, and I should probably end up soon here. Yes. That I'm trying. You don't understand. Dominic's going to talk, and then there's going to be no space in the room. There's a wonderful opportunity that we get as black folks to tell our stories and have them heard. We tell them at home. We tell them at home. We tell them at church. We tell them in a club. But to have them dramatized on stage is something that is still new. You would think that by this time, after having lived through the Black Arts Movement, which was not what we called it, we were just making theater in New York City, and now they put a name on it, is that those stories that we tell are really powerful and necessary, and I'm hoping that all of us will get a chance to share them later.
Thank you, Harry.
Good afternoon. My name is Maya Washington, and I am an actor and a filmmaker and a poet and an activist and a dancer and a director and a writer and and for me, that has been my unique reality as a Black performer, as a Black writer, as a Black storyteller, that it is not uncommon for us to wear many hats in this world and in this field. I grew up here in the Twin Cities. Started out performing as a young actor in the Twin Cities, commercials and theater and things like that. Went off to the University of Southern California, where I received a bachelor's degree in theater. While I was there, I also studied in the film school and took classes and took advantage of the Los Angeles community, graduated, worked in LA as a performer, came back to the Twin Cities, got an MFA in creative writing from Hamline University, started that program as a playwright, graduated with a thesis in poetry, became a Cave Canem Fellow, which is a fellowship for African American poets in America. And very much the Black Arts Movement is why I'm here. This is why I saw, wow, there's a way that you can tell stories that can create change in our community and also allow us to reinvent ourselves over and over again. And so my current reinvention is I'm a filmmaker. So I have a short film called White Space that will make its network television premiere in April in a series called African American Shorts. It's traveled the world, won some awards, and created a platform for me to work on the current film that I'm now producing and directing, a documentary called Through the Banks of the Red Cedar. And that's about my father, who is a living football legend in Minnesota, Gene Washington, and about his journey to Michigan State from the segregated South and ultimately to the Minnesota Vikings as the second pick for the Minnesota Vikings and one of 3 first-round draft picks in the '67 draft, along with 3 other African Americans from Michigan State.
Yeah, Maya, before Dominic gets started and takes all the air, we just met today, but I know your father from Volunteers of America, long-serving board member there. So see the connections here. Yeah. All right, Dominic, you're up.
It's bad because I am the only faculty member at the University of Minnesota. I have a couple of students here, but I will try to be brief. But I had to prepare something. So. For opening remarks, we were requested to look at our experience on the topic. I will try to be brief, but my experience with this topic operates as a practitioner, a student of Black theater, an educator, and a citizen in the world, but also someone who spends much of my active professional life trying to shift these positions. Some of my students know this story. I was an actor in New York. I did a lot of things, but like most actors in New York, I had Law and Order auditions. And the last one that I went on was an episode called A Losing Season. One of the compelling things when you're going out to calls is you are competitive with your peers, but they're also your friends. So Law and Order would pull these things from the headlines. So we would invariably be in response to what was going on at the day of the time. So stereotypes were moved to the side because we were part of the news cycle, so to speak. Also, Law and Order gets a pass by a lot of people because Essa Pather Murkison, who's a wonderful actress, has been Lieutenant Van Buren, and that inoculates Dick Wolf from some obvious criticism. My agent was thrilled when I got the sides for A Losing Season because I was to read for the plum role, as she called it. I also was to have an extended monologue when I confessed to the crime in question at the end of the episode. This episode was euphemistically known as the Ray Caruth episode. Ray Caruth was a football player for the Carolina Panthers. When he discovered that his girlfriend was pregnant, he hired someone to kill her. In this episode, the Caruth character was a basketball player who grew up in a hardscrabble existence, and he had a girlfriend who was cheating on her fiancé, a cuckold who was a banker. Now, Kevin Daniels, the actor who played the basketball player, was a friend of mine. I played college basketball, which is a sidebar. They didn't call me in to do that. The other characters were drug dealers, and of course the cold-blooded killer. So when you go to these auditions, your friends are like, "Hey, man, what you doing? You're the boyfriend. You're the basketball player." I'm like, "No, I'm the killer. And so when I go to the audition, which was at Chelsea Pier, it's teeming with black men. It's teeming with black men. And one of the things that I have to mention is that none of these black male images were positive. The basketball player is a coward, the boyfriend is a cuckold, the drug dealer is who he is, and the drug dealer has a friend who is an assassin. It made no difference about my past or about my learning or about any of that stuff. My agent was excited because I was reading for this wonderful role. I should probably also sidebar, segue to say that the person who did get cast in it, my agent was right. Michael Kenneth Williams is the person who they ultimately cast in it. And you've seen Michael on The Wire. He's gone on to do Boardwalk Empire. He's a wonderful actor, wonderful man. So I'm saying that my agent was right in that thing. But the thing that I said to my agent, because on that same day I was also went out for a screen test for Marcy X, which was a film that was directed by Richard Benjamin. And in that film, there was a really nice white woman. If you ever go for a screen test, it's usually the director and just one other person. Really nice white woman behind the camera. And Richard Benjamin is directing me and tells me to scream my line as if I'm screaming it across a prison yard. I should probably say what my line was. My line was, F-U, you white, H-O-B. That was my line. And I was like, in this, I went to grad school. For this, I went to grad school. You know, the day as I'm leaving the Law & Order audition, I actually called my agent and said I no longer wanted to do this. She was upset because actually Law & Order called her and said they wanted me to come for callbacks. And I said, I'm not doing it. I said, I went to grad school. I said, my mother's alive. I don't want her to turn on the TV and have the notion that her son is assassinating a pregnant woman in the trunk of her car, even for the sake of the career. Now, one of the things that I think is important is when I saw this topic, it also brought back many things, including my college days. One of the challenges for people to understand, and I'm not going to be long, is that for most people, the popular stereotypes are not black performance. They're actually things inside the white imagination that they placed on black bodies. As an undergraduate, I came to learn about one of the most important theater troupes, the African Grove Theater, that some people here, some people who are in my class know about. They operated in 1821 by James Hewlett and William Alexander Brown in Lower Manhattan. The troupe did a variety of performances, including the production of Richard III. But one of the performances that I always bring to the attention of people is a play called King Shotaway, or the Insurrection of the Caribs. Now, this is done in 1822, and you have to realize the Haitian Revolution ended in 1814. And this was commented on by the New York Evening Post as, and this is a quote, "It seems these descendants of Africa are determined to carry into full practice the doctrine of liberty and equality by acting plays and mentally by writing them." Most theater historians, even today, ignore the African Grove. As black people performing, they were before the thing where most theater historians go, where they deal with performance of blackness, and that's Blackface Minstrelsy. Now, Blackface Minstrelsy is a very complex thing, and Thomas Danforth Rice is kind of the father of it, but the reason why I think it's important is that his first performance acknowledged by anyone is 1831. The African Grove was operating in 1821. It's also interesting for people who are students of American history that America was developing a lot of its symbology at the time. The War of 1812 just happened. So in this period of time prior to the Civil War, there are a lot of areas in which Americans were trying to determine what it was to be an American. And the performance of self or the performance of other is in that conversation. You know, one of the sad things about T.D. Rice is he was an out-of-work actor trying to get a gig. And he puts this Jim Crow thing together. Wheel about, turnabout, jump Jim Crow. And one of the things about Wheel about, turnabout, jump Jim Crow, the lyrics, for some, are simple. Come listen, all you gals and boys. I's just from Tuckahoe. I'm going to sing a little song. My name is Jim Crow. Wheel about, turnabout, and jump Jim Crow. Now, it was a very popular song. It was a very popular performance. T.D. Rice never thought about segregated water fountains, although he did have one of the variants in the lyrics, which I always think is compelling as we move towards the Civil War. Should they get to fighting, perhaps the blacks will rise, for their wish for freedom is shining in their eyes. If the blacks should get free, I guess they'll see some bigger, and I shall consider it a bold stroke for the nigger. I'm for freedom and for union altogether. Although I'm a black man, the white is called my brother. So one of the things which is compelling is that he places the notion of black freedom inside this and the notion that black freedom is not a good thing. Now, one of the things which I mentioned in my class is that this is, of course, Pharoah. And this is a popular song. So I want you to put in the context that Jim Crow was popular as as happy. Now, people are like, happy's an innocuous song, isn't it? But one of the things that's compelling about Happy as a performance site is that happiness on the video is predicated on mobility. You have to be an ambulatory person. I understand at the end of the video there is a young woman in a wheelchair who rolls around, but happiness is predicated on mobility. You have to dance to be happy. I ain't mad at Farrell, but we never think about that when we're looking at this. I only say this not to defend T.D. Rice, but to understand how popular forms of entertainment can infect our thinking. Our cognition operates differently, and that's an important thing to think about when you're talking about 1831 and you have immigrants coming from all over the world and how cities are exploding and how we're engaged in the notion of self and how this is not a stereotype, because a stereotype meant that there was an original thing. It's an actual fabrication that ended up growing and metastasizing, as I say. Let me go forward, and I am not going to be long, although I have to do what I have to do.
Can you just wrap it up?
I am going to wrap it up.
Yeah.
I am going to wrap it up shortly. One of the things that I think that is also significant for people is that black artists were not passive in this engagement. William Wells Brown, not related to William Alexander Brown, wrote a play called The Escape or a Leap for Freedom. Inside The Escape or a Leap for Freedom, he has a song called Dandy Jim, and when you read the song, you don't understand what William Wells Brown is doing. Inside Dandy Jim, or the lyrics in Dandy Jim, he mentions the notion that he tells us of the glorious one, I think his name is Washington, how did he fight for liberty to save a 3-pence tax on tea. But now we look about and see that we poor blacks are not so free. We're whipped and thrashed about like fools and have no chance at common schools. If you take the minstrel song, Dandy Jim of Caroline, which was a popular song at the time, it doesn't have those same lyrics. He was trying to reposition those lyrics the way some people in the 70s did with 60s and 70s with war songs. We're trying to reposition those lyrics. Now, the important thing to remember is that artists from the beginning, African-American artists from the beginning of this country, were trying to engage in pushing back those images. There were also African-American artists like my dear friend Ernest Hogan, who is a black man who had a very popular song. He was a black man in Blackface Minstrelsy who had a very popular song called All Coons Look Alike. Ernest Hogan's from Chicago, and what he did was he heard a song in Chicago called All Pimps Look Alike, and he turned that song into All Coons Look Alike, and he performed it to great financial success. So I want to be clear that one of the things about these stereotypes is, one, African-American artists were always fighting them. Two, African-American artists after 1850 were engaged in the notion of profiting from them as well. So that becomes one of these teased out problems that we have. And at that, I am going to leave because I'm checking my time. All right.
Thank you, Dominic.
May I just say, I am so thankful, seriously, that this man is my teacher. I get the privilege of sitting with him every Monday and Wednesday from 9 to 11 a.m. And we learn, no, he did not pay me to say this. And this is why I search you out and probably get on your nerves just sitting in your office for hours. Thank you so much. My name is Erin Washington. I am from Montgomery, Alabama, a proud Alabamian, and also a conflicted Alabamian. And I think that the first time that I knew that I was interested in theater was when I would stand on my grandmama's Cadillac in the yard and be a preacher. And so I think I became an artist when I went to Alabama State University and met a woman named Dr. Tonia Stewart, who actually showed me that it was possible now to be a first-year PhD candidate in theater. So Dr. Stewart instilled in us at Alabama State, starting at 8 years old, that we could be free, that we could stand in a space and say something and people would actually listen to us. And it seems very simple, but I'm so thankful for that space because it's helped me to extend my work. So I went to Florida A&M for undergraduate to a HBCU, which I learned lots of things. I then went and got my MFA in acting from American Conservatory Theater, which I learned a lot of things. Also, it was the first space that I was placed in that my body was put in a danger. And so in our graduate school, so I'm speaking to you, we had a showcase. And so Showcase for every actor, no matter your race, is all about showing who you are. And you have to fit this type. You know, you have to fit this type. And so since I was the light-skinned, cute, skinny girl, the type that I had to fit was the whore. And so in my class, regardless of all of the Chekhov, the Shakespeare that they taught us, I was expected to wear panties and bra for my scene, where a man was going down on me. I think it was the thing. And so I was like, I came to California. Like I went to New York. And this is what my body's expected to do. And so, you know, being young, you know, I was like, well, maybe I can wear the bra. And so looking back, I wish that I would have my 31-year-old mind and I would have said, I refuse to participate, but I did participate. So then I went to New York, where I had, since I was on top of this car, Cadillac in Alabama, wanted to be on Broadway. And so I went to Broadway and I saw the lights and it was so super fantastic and I enjoy it to this day. But it was my first audition that I auditioned for The Lion King. Where my other classmates were auditioning for lead roles, playing actual human beings. And so I had to play a lion. And so it was at this moment, and I actually, you know, they say I have some talent, so I made it to the finals. And so the casting director was like, when you go in, sing the song like this, do it like this, you know, and in the way that he was telling me to do it, it didn't sound like culturally the music that we sang in Alabama and that I had grown up singing. And so I was so conflicted. So I got in the room and they said, sing the song. And, you know, in that moment, I just tried to be Aretha Franklin. And I sang that song in the exact way that I felt that I needed to sing that song. And they took me out the room quick and they said, you need to regroup, and go back in this room. Aaron, you have the part. And this was a tour. I mean, making like $1,500 a week. You have the part. My friend was in the part on Broadway. She had walked me through the steps. I went back in the room. And this time I tried to sing like Nina Simone. I mean, I could not do it. And so it was at that moment that I continued trying to act. I continued trying to be in these spaces that my training told me I was supposed to be in. And then I think one day I just hit a wall. And I actually stopped singing, which is something that I've done my whole life. I didn't sing for a year and a half. I didn't even hum in the shower. And so the voice that I had, I never knew that my singing was not just to be performative. My singing was for my spirit. And so, in that space and time, I had a lot of time to think. I started a production company called Soul Productions. We would do music shows. We would do shows on the side of the street. We would do shows in nursing homes. We started to teach kids, which is what I have been doing for 10 years. Using theater as a tool to teach liberation, to teach self-love, going into classrooms, subverting the public school system, which is the horror school system for me, and getting into spaces with kids that people say are at risk, that people say are special ed and cannot make it. And we would go in because nobody cared what we were doing, honestly. And we would teach love through the guise of theater. And so now I'm learning that theater is not just a place where I'm supposed to do a play. Theater is a mode of thinking. It's just as blackness. You know, blackness is not just this skin and this body. Blackness is an expression. It's a form. It defies form. It is hard. It is beautiful. It is everything. It is nothing. It is complicated. It is privileged. It is underprivileged. It is something that I grapple with every day, and that's why I'm in theater, specifically black theater, because I love it so much and because I hate it so much at the same time. To see how black bodies in this country have had to maneuver in space, I mean, that is a play within itself, that you have to figure out your budget, that you have to figure out the clothes that you have to wear, the lights that you want to shine, and from what direction that you want them to shine in. So I think my quote, to follow my teacher, sir, is Dr. Barbara Ann Tier, and she encourages me. She created the National Black Theater in Harlem in the 1960s. She said, we must begin building cultural centers where we can enjoy being free, open, and black, where we can find out how talented we really are, where we can be what we were born to be and not what we were brainwashed to be, where we can literally blow our minds with blackness. I want to blow my mind with blackness. This is what I want to do. And, you know, some questions that I pose to this topic is, where's the part 2, where we're speaking about blowing our minds with blackness, where we're not forgetting about these stereotypes, but figuring out a way through these types, not by using the same oppressive system that created a type. Strategy sessions where we're throwing things on the wall, as my friend David over here is doing with Who's Diversity, where we're throwing things on the wall and saying, how can we liberate ourselves? Like, this is what we can do. Okay, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this. So where's that part 2? And how do we shift the binaries of oppressor, oppressed? In 100 years, will the black body be the one oppressed? Is blackness the oppression of the black body tied, or the oppression of the black body tied to a literal body? In 200 years, will it be the alien? In 200, or will blackness, be this thought that has to continue to be oppressed so that capitalism can reign supreme? And what are we willing to do, if you have a tie to blackness or not, to make sure that that does not happen? And my second question is simply, how do we create spaces for liberation of the black body? Because I feel that once the black body and blackness is liberated, this thought and concept will sweep the world as it's already doing now. So not just in a stereotypical form, in a liberation form. So this is why I'm in theater, and I grapple with it every day, and it keeps me up at night, but it keeps me encouraged. And I must say, in this space, that I'm very thankful for my great-grandmother and my great-great-grandmother that toiled through Alabama so that I could call myself an artist. They were dreaming something about me. They were dreaming about me before they even could see me. So I hope that the work that we do is not just for us right here, but it's for, Cassius's kids. I'm creating for 200-300 years from now, and hopefully some reverb can hit in this space, but I don't have to see it at all to follow Martin Luther King. But
thank you so much for the powerful narratives. I do have a couple of questions before we turn it over to the audience. And the first question is, what obligations, if any, do black artists have to engage with the most urgent social and political issues in our community? And how do black artists stay relevant for our communities in that way?
I just personally, because I grew up in the Twin Cities, and are we not about social justice here? Isn't that just part of our identity? It's just who we are. I had an opportunity to participate in a kind of a national hashtag thing that came out of a poetry community I belong to called Cave Canem. And it sparked the weekend that Michael Brown verdict was read. We decided, how are we going to respond? And so a few among our fellowship said, well, let's start posting videos of ourselves reading poetry. And so within a few hours of Black Friday, the internet was populated with over 200 some videos with the hashtag Black Poets Speak Out. We did a local event on the 26th in collaboration with Million Artists Minnesota, and actually did a live event at Penumbra Theater where local actors and poets read poetry that speaks to these times and this political concern for police violence and things that are happening in our community. That was a natural reaction for me, the poet, but for me, the actor, having a community of actors that I kind of engage with in Los Angeles and kind of nationally, I had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder thinking we're a bunch of unknown poets. People don't even care. I mean, among this community of Cave Canem, we have elders like, Amiri Baraka, the late Amiri Baraka, and Toy Daracot and Cornelia Seedy, and people who have really kind of led us to this place. But if we're a bunch of unknown poets doing this, where is Hollywood? Where's the outcry? This kind of sense of how we can forget when we are caught up in the construct or the capitalist construct of our art is for profit. The idea that if you just have a webcam and a piece of art, right, you can reach the entire world. And we had poets posting from a variety of backgrounds, races, ethnicities, finding a way to use art in that way. I don't necessarily feel now that, time has passed, and I think it was a charged moment for me, but I was a little frustrated that I know so many talented people, and I'm like, well, where are you? Nobody cares about my little poem, but, it's something. We could be doing something. But I think that's the beauty of speaking to what Aaron spoke to, of what our ancestors laid a foundation for us to the point that we're even still here, that Black DNA is still in this country is amazing. And part of that is you can either take that as an obligation and a responsibility, but you also have this kind of freedom where that was the right for you not to speak was fought for as well. Your right to remain quiet, your art to belong to just you is your right. But for me, I create because I have to. This is how I use my voice. This is how I use an activist voice.
I mean, one of the things about the 21st century artist, which is very hard to say, is that the artist actually isn't engaged in the community. The artist is engaged in making her or his own community. And that's a sad thing. I mean, the fact that they are not engaged in the community in the way, and I'm, a child of the Black Arts Movement, and the later Amiri Baraka would always tell me that I wasn't revolutionary enough, and I understand that because he was Amiri. But one of the things which my ex-professor, George Houston Bass, has had a research to performance method in terms of play development, and his method, part of it, was that the community could respond, and I went to school in Providence, Rhode Island. And he said, if 3 elders in the community have issue with your play, you have to change your play. And I said, you're crazy. I said, you're crazy. And he said the thing which I still, and that thing which I think is really important, he said, you think you're helping the community. You're not listening to the community. And I was 20 years old, and I was smug, and I had done all the research on my play, so I thought I knew, what I was laying down. George Bass has passed on, and he was right. It's really difficult for me to put that thing together, that we don't listen to our community. Even artists who engage in the notion that you are trying to help your community, you think you're doing something for them, but you ain't listening. I mean, that's one of the hardest things as a human being to do, not just as an artist. And I think that one of the things which is tough is our communities, we think we have solutions, academics, artists, and the thing that we don't do is we don't listen to the people. We talk at them, we talk past them, but we don't listen to them. And I do think it's the artist's responsibility, if they want to do, as the late James Baldwin said, dig up the questions that the answers have hidden. Because I do think that's the function of art. Our job is to dig up the questions that these answers, false answers, have hidden.
If you want to, go ahead, quickly.
What they said. The idea that artists are not responsive to the community, I think, has also been changed a lot. Just because there's a way that we have to make this connection between academia, which I always feel, and I'll just be upfront, is so disconnected to real people. I take the bus to work. I see women with their children on the bus. We're not sitting in a room like this. So y'all cannot talk about oppression. You get to do this. So I don't want to hear it anymore. I'm really tired of it. So you get to have an education. You are not oppressed. You get to do, you can complain about your goddamn loan, but you got one. So, that said, the listening to community is what's harder to do. And it also is not that hard to do, you just do it. Because we are an entitled, privileged bunch. We get to go to a BFA program and get to study Shakespeare. You get to, travel the world. You get to go on Broadway. Imagine going into somebody's community center and how are you going to find daycare for these kids so that these women or Native Americans who I've been working with in Somali can tell their story. That takes a different kind of commitment, a different kind of work. And there are a set of artists that are really interested and willing to do that. It does not pay. It doesn't. But it's not about that pay. I mean, we get the gift that, yes, I get to work at a college that pays me very well, but I have to give it back. And that's the thing that you have to, all of you that are having your degrees, you know that you have to give it back. Because if you don't, somebody's going to take it away from you.
So quickly, I think that for me, in my young self, it's a difference between an actor and an artist, for me. And so now in my older life, I have claimed to just, I work with youth. And as you were speaking about Maya, all of the responses to Trayvon and Mike Brown, I mean, it's so important. But also at the same time, this disconnect from community is huge because if we are connected to community, we will already be talking to a Trayvon, daily. And it won't be an act of being an activist or it's just being a community member. So, and I think that we all have that opportunity if we put it on YouTube, if we can write a poem or not, to be an artist, to say, I'm going to talk to my son, my cousin, my brother, and I'm going to tell him, I love you. And if you need anything, please text me or call me. For me, artists, actors who are not, who can perform on a stage or do a movie or sing beautifully, that's very important. It has a role. But for me, what makes you an artist is the consciousness that you are building within yourself to go further than yourself. And to allow community to change you. For you to have a thought and then it shifts totally, because that's what happens when you go do the story circle in the community center. It's going to be totally different from in this room. If I plan to say something, I'm going to say that exact thing. Or when I go on the stage at Rarick, I have to do my same performance because so many other people are revolving around me and waiting for me to say the right line. And if I don't, then the whole show is messed up. But what would happen in professional plays if in the middle of a play, a person was feeling something and they stopped? And they said, I don't want to say these lines anymore. Or they started to do their own play. Or, how can we push what it is to be an artist, in multiple spaces so that eventually the community center space is the Broadway space, is this room, is outside. So I think it's a distinct difference between an artist and someone given talent or, to perform something.
Yeah, Aaron, this is a good lead into my last question, and especially around your narrative of being a preacher on your grandmother's Cadillac. How do we encourage creative students and their parents to understand that this is a craft that drives the creation around theater and film? So in other words, how do we get Black parents to understand that being an artist is a real job and where their children might be able to make a living and a life?
I have no idea. I'm not sure if my parents believe that to this day.
Am I on this? Okay. I want to go, you as performer, actor, artist, whatever you're doing, that's not going to happen. Because no, I'm serious. My mother hates theater. She does to this day. I have made my living doing it for 45 years. That's what I do. I can convince her that this should be a career, but I made the career. There is something about the passion that you also, some people, you're an administrator. Did your parents say, go be an administrator? I'm sure they didn't. But maybe they did. I don't know. But the idea that you have a passion to go work with a community and work with the police. You have a passion to go and write poetry. That's what you end up pursuing. When I teach a first-year course and I have students that are in there and I have to talk to parents, I said, some of you are going to have kids that this is what they're going to want to do. You have to just sit back and go, because then they will discover their way. Some people who are artists may not discover their path until they're 40 years old. I knew I was going to do this when I was in first grade because I was in front of the church being a milkweed. But yes, all of those, because I recognize that the voices that you have can actually change how people think. And that was my recognition. And there's a lot of people in the world, and there are these young people out in the world. There's old people. I just want to that's another thing we keep doing. It's like I don't want to call it ageism, but there's some people in their 40s and 50s who suddenly realize that they have a voice and some talent as well. And nobody's giving you permission to do this. You get to do this.
But but I do think one of the things which is strange, because both of my parents have passed on, and if they raised from the dead, they would want me to go to medical school tomorrow. There ain't no doubt about it. But the thing, and I said this to my mother years ago, I did a show at Crossroads called Wedding Dance, and the second day of the show, the box office people, Crossroads has 300 seats, 299, and the whole middle section was developmentally challenged people in the middle section. Now, I was younger, and I had some industry people coming, and I called my agent, and I was really annoyed. And I said, I can't believe they got these retarded, this is what I said to my agent. They got these retarded people in here. That's what I said to my agent. The show goes on. They don't move. They watch Wedding Dance. They get up, and two women who were taking care of these people walked up to me and said, this was really a good play. I don't know what you did. But you did something because they paid attention. I called my mother. I said, Mom, this theater thing is weird. I don't even understand it because Dominic as an individual doesn't have the patience to talk to those 90 people. I don't. As a human being, I'm not that good of a person. But I can make something and my collaborators can make something. And I can communicate to people who I wouldn't in any other way. I mean, the multiple points of entry that you make in theater, to say it's priceless. When you talk about, I remember walking down the streets in Brooklyn and a woman walked up to me and she said, I remembered your play 10 years after the play. She got the play wrong. She got the theme wrong. She got everything wrong inside the play. But the one thing she remembered, she said, I remember there's a story in the play that one character walks from one side of Jamaica to the other with a box of crap, and he doesn't open it till he gets to the other side. And I've always remembered that if we have some crap, we should open it immediately and share it with whoever we got. And I was sitting there like, that's theater. It's like stuff that you're not a hedge fund manager. No, you ain't going to be able to buy your Bentley. But you will have experiences, and I say this all the time, that buoy you in the world, that make, and I can't even believe it. I'm just a regular dude from Jersey. Some of the stuff that I've done, some of the people that I've had a great impact on, like I still can't believe. And I don't know if, whatever, my journey is, whatever it is, but I'm so thrilled that I found this thing that lets me go and hopefully have conversations with people and also listen to them at the same time.
Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, it's time for the audience to participate and ask the questions that you have. So.
We'll see how articulate I can be on the spot, but I'm curious. I mean, I'm an alumnus. Before I got my degree, more than a few years ago in communication studies, I studied film history, and so I'm a huge humanities geek. And the few to several people in this room who know me know that all too well. But the cinema is on my mind all the time, but particularly right now. I know that I can talk to at least one person here who works in film. I'm curious about 8 years ago a phenomenon that was was it basically the Black Oscars, which like almost nobody knew about. It was canceled because 2 years prior, I believe in 2005, Denzel Washington and Halle Berry finally got their Oscars, and so they decided, okay, we've made enough progress. We don't have to have the Black Oscars anymore. I thought to myself, that's a mistake. At some point, they're going to notice that. I wonder, in your opinions, given the fact that I think that the Oakland Tribune ran with a headline a few months ago about was it the Oscar for the best Caucasian is given the whiteness of the Oscar nominees. What was it a mistake to cancel the Black Oscars, and then just as importantly, where will the progress come from? And this is far too large of a question. I'm sorry about that, but where will the progress come from, and how? Do we have to wait another 5 or 8 years before there is another Aquila and the Bee or something like that?
Possibly.
That's what I thought.
I think there's a lot, I think, in that question. I think first and foremost, and this speaks a little bit to kind of what Dominic was touching on, it's like we've always had this need as a people to create our own, but sometimes that creating our own is just mimicking what white people have. So if white people have this awards thing, then we need to have an awards thing. And in my personal experience, and I'm kind of still very much emerging in the Hollywood world, but the little spaces where I've been able to quietly, fluidly be, whether that's an A-list party and just quietly be the black girl, who was invited to this and you don't know who I am and that's okay, to kind of what's happening in Black Hollywood. There are a number of wonderful African-American based film festivals throughout the country who give out awards, who go out of their way to really highlight and give opportunities to young voices, emerging voices in Black cinema. But I think there is this weird thing that doesn't necessarily feel congruent for me of needing to, well, white people have brunches, so we need to have a brunch, or we need to have a Black Sundance, or we need to have, as opposed to really just focusing on creating provocative art, really creating cinema that pushes things forward. And I think Ava Duvernay is a great example of somebody who has had a very long career in Hollywood and has, on her own, with her own money, started a body of work and a movement, a firm. It's the African American Film Releasing Movement. I think that's the full name of the acronym. Of finding ways, okay, well, if we can't get into the mainstream cinemas or we can't get into the studio system, then let's find a platform and a way of distributing independent Black films in the festival circuit. And so I think creating spaces like that allow for artists to really take risks, allow for filmmakers to really create art for the sake of creating art. But when you look at an Aquila and the Bee, or even Selma, which ended up being a studio picture, or The Butler, a lot of these Black films that are studio films, that's a whole other monster, and that is, as much as African Americans are trying to figure that out, people of all races, ethnicities, and voices white people are still trying to figure out the studio system. And so I think for me, because I came to filmmaking with a whole other background and a lot of what Aaron talks about as a performer I have run into. So for me, I have this kind of freedom living in my own bubble, traveling through these worlds, just creating art that I am really proud of and creating work that has to, at the end of the day, please me. Because there is no guarantee I will ever get the money that I've invested, the time, the energy. But for me, at the end of the day, I want to do what Dominic spoke of. I want people to come into a cinema and be changed in some way. I want people to be moved, to feel something more than I want to get invited to a brunch and put on a pretty dress. That would be fun, great thing to tell the grandkids someday. But I've been doing this since I was 8. You know what I'm saying? Like, I do this because I have to. I do this because I love it. But I think I don't have the answer. But there is some weird thing where we want to just create what white people have to make it legitimate, as opposed to believing what we have is legitimate and beautiful and unique, and that is enough.
I would say to that point too, what we have is enough. Dominic posed a question in class the other day that I've still been thinking about is, how does the black actor validate themselves? On what platform? And so I think we have to think about, in your question, what does progress look like? Like, is progress this? Because some, a firm is huge. A firm is huge. And it's mostly based online. Like, that's, they set up a system where Ava Duvernay has people in each city that are called Mavericks. And they scout out in their own community places where people can screen films so that Ava Duvernay and her staff, like, they can't be in 50 places at one time because of finances. So she relies on community members to give her a heads up, and then they have a a drawing at the end of the year, and one of those people gets to go to Sundance with them. So, like, those are volunteers. To me, that is very progressive. It might not look like the red carpet, but what does progress look like for you? Also, another network that you should know about, if you don't, which I'm sure you know, is Black and Sexy TV, which is on YouTube. The Black and Sexy TV is phenomenal. There are a multiplicity of shows that deal with the black community, and I mean, shows from like That Guy to she's laughing. I mean, a multiple Issa Rae online, The Misadventures of the Awkward Black Girl. These types of shows that literally start on a free platform called YouTube, now has her with a contract at HBO. Now, I'm afraid of what's going to happen when she goes to HBO, because now her show that was called The Misadventures of the Awkward Black Girl is now on HBO called Insecure. So what is the difference between these two platforms? And we have the amazing opportunity in this space to study and think about that. So what does it mean when you talk about My Black is Beautiful in an awkward way to now it being called Insecure? And so, but at the same time, Issa is producing a new series called First, that pretty much was put out to show that black people can love each other and kiss and hug and not just scream and holler and wear their pants down low. So, people are doing very progressive things. It may never get on ABC, but I would offer, I'm not sure the red carpet, if I want to walk on that carpet, what does it mean? And I'm going to forget her name, but the young sister that went to the Oscars with the locks, faux locks. Yes. And she was told that, oh, your hair must smell like patchouli and weed. So, and she's in Disney. She has a cute dress on, and she has fair skin. Seemingly things that would qualify you to be at the Oscars, to be what is right. And she didn't even pass the test. So, I'm not sure how we pass the test, but creating spaces like online spaces, I think, are powerful ways for us to progress ourselves.
This is real quick. I think that one of the most telling things you can watch is Denzel's acceptance speech. Because I think both of those Oscar winners at that moment, when they won the Oscar, I mentioned it, Hallie is a black girl in the South who gets in a truck with Billy Bob, and it's like, what are you thinking? And I'm sure that Denzel, his speech was compelling, because I'm sure he thanked Sidney, but he was like, I didn't get this from Malcolm X. I got this for being the devil with the white boy being the savior. How does this operate? Like, so the notion that these awards validate us in any way is always problematic. That's all I was going to say.
Okay.
You've all brought up so many interesting things, that some of which are kind of contradictory to me, about the role of an artist. You've talked about listening to the community and having that be a very different thing than just performing for the community. Simultaneously, you have talked about the magic that you bring, you don't even know how you bring it, to somebody who hears you, and something happens because you're not engaging at the community level with retarded people, whatever. And so I'd like to hear from you all about the nature of this responsibility of an artist. Black, white, doesn't matter to me.
No, I will say, I mean, and I don't reduce this as simply as this, although I do think the question you got to ask yourself as an artist is why you're doing it and who are you talking to? Why I do what I do, even though I don't have the ability to talk to everybody, is I actually want the world to be a better place when I leave it. So everything I make is predicated on the notion that the collision of human beings hopefully will shift over time. And the black collision is where I situate myself. Who you're speaking to, and I say this without reservation when people talk about you're speaking to your family, I actually like to speak to black people who are not the positive black image people. So a lot of times people are like, oh, such and so is innocent. I actually like to speak to the guilty. I like to speak to the people who you don't want in your space. And that is so why I speak and how I make my stuff is really important. How that thing operates, and I hate to go to my aesthetic godfather. There's a film called Soul Survivor in which Fred Wesley comments on James Brown, and he says, you know, you can't write James Brown's music down on paper. Dun, 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 bump. Dun, dun. You can't have a rest and a half. You can't put that on music. That doesn't hold logic. And so James Brown later on says, you think God's ears are a lie? That's what James says. Because one of the things which is really problematic, and this is when you're an academic or when you're an artist or when you take these labels, is that you forget that you're a human being. And being a human being, we all have the desire to understand the basic question, like I'm born in this world and I'm going to die. Why did those white people move away from my little neighborhood when I was a kid? Why do I have a preponderance of white students in a black theater class? Like, these are the questions that I ask myself, but I don't want any of those students to go away. I want them to be there. And I think that one of the things that happens is it's answering the unanswerable. So when you said that it's contradictory, one of the big questions I have inside the academy is that education is a messy proposition. Art making is a messy proposition. To think that either education or art making could be efficiently constructed, that you can make info in, info out, whether it be art making or knowledge in terms of the classroom, it just can't happen. So I do refer to James Brown only in the fact that stuff can't be written down, but everybody grooves every time I play it in class for 2 seconds. So I know that there's something going on. There's a connection to the heart, if nothing else.
So you're kind of asking, why do we do this? Why do we do it?
That's not my question. My question was, how do you think about the role of an artist? You yourself, others you know, others you teach. Do they all have a social responsibility?
No, they don't. I mean, we want to, in the ideal world, yes, every artist should be responsible and should be taking care of it. That's not their gig. It's not. And as much as we should insist that they should, some people just want to be on Broadway and make a lot of money. Some people want to be on television and have a series and walk the red carpet. There is nothing wrong with that. And what happens is there is a tendency to then demonize those that just want to be an artist and make their work. And I'm not saying that they need to have that responsibility. It's also your choice and how you want to do that. The things about what we're responsible for have transformed in the last 40 years. What we were trying to do in 1976 is different than in 2016. It's just a different kind of world. So the responsibility that you feel is really one of your passions. My passion is going to be so much different than Dominic's because he's had a different experience. Mine really was, I want to get into a classroom if I'm teaching, but otherwise I want to get into somebody's house and have them tell me a story because I'm just nosy. And then I can get that story and have them tell the story again to somebody else, and I can give them a skill because I've learned the craft to tell their story better. And to me, that's part of my gift back. because that's what I get to do. I think it's what we all are sort of learning to do, is that we get all this training and education, and what are you doing with it? Are you just holding on to it? As the artist, it's like the output sometime is, I'm going to make some really interesting, abstract performance that's going to be in a parking lot. Good for you. I want to do a nice, really amazing Shakespeare play and have 5 designers and have some great costumes and my sets are going to fly through the air. And that's as valid because there's a story there that maybe it's going to affect somebody. So I had a conversation with one of my neighbors last night who's a screenwriter, and we had this discussion about what is a director? What is directing? And it's storytelling. That's what teaching is. You're also, Dominic's a great storyteller. Maya's a great storyteller. The artist at the end of the table, she's a fabulous storyteller, isn't she? Oh my God. So yeah, that's what we really want to do.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Hi. Is this on? Oh, it is.
Yeah, speak loudly. Speak loudly.
I'm Izzy, and this is my sister. This is my mom. And Mia and Noelle are adopted. And my father is also Caucasian. And so you were talking about we should have a black brunch. We need to have this and that. And so I think my experience, my life kind of engaging with community and socializing with other people has been really unique. Getting the response when they find out I have 2 white parents been very disheartening and different. A lot of hatred. My mom always said she was scared that I would get racism from white people, but she never expected I'd get it from black people. And that's honestly like the only racism I've experienced. And the first time I was ever, I think, accepted by another culture was through theater. And that I didn't think it was possible for me to be accepted by another culture because I'd been rejected by both my whole life. But my own family, we formed I like to think we formed our own culture of love. And that's what kind of rules the world, no matter what race or love. So theater and arts really helped me develop who I am, and it made me want to help the next future Isabel who comes along. I'm Isabel. Oh, Izzy. Right. So next future Izzy who comes along, when she's lost, that I can help her find herself too. So
I have to tell you, I love your question. And I say this because I teach a lot of theater people. We are all, I shouldn't say this, most theater people are outsiders. We're outsiders in different ways. Like, I used to always joke about it. Like, I grew up in New Jersey, but I used to joke that I never had a home. All right, so my parents, I did have a home. I actually had a home. But my parents are from Jamaica. So all the black kids, first thing, I moved into an all-white neighborhood that became all black. We moved into an all-white neighborhood when I was 4. By the time I was 8, it was an all-black neighborhood. But all the black kids were like, your parents talk funny. Because they speak with an accent, they come from a different place. And then I'd go to Jamaica, and they'd be like, you're a Yankee, you ain't, you know what I mean? So you live in a place that is your imagination for a long time. Before theater, church was always funky and great for me because you get credit. But I used to also talk to my dog, and my mother was a little worried about my psychological space because why are you talking to a dog? But I think I just want to applaud you. And one of the things that I want to say is that it's so important to, like, I don't even know how to describe this. It's like if anybody is outside, that's part of the question of how you do it. It's part of my job to bring those people in. That is part of, and I used to tell people, it used to trip me out when people would be like, "Oh, you cool with everybody." It's like, no, I'm not cool with everybody, but I don't want anybody to feel outside. You know, I went to all-male Catholic high school, and any effeminate boy, they would give a lot of static to. I'd be like, "Hey, you want to get in my car? We're going to drive somewhere." Because I don't want you to feel outside, because I know what it's like to feel outside. And I do think that's part of the mission of theater, and that is actually part of listening. You know what I mean? And whether or not you take your family and you let that trickle out as like pools of love, I mean, I just think that's the way to make the world better. And I think I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad you said what you said.
I'd also like to add that, you know, part of what fuels me as an artist, and it is my sense of responsibility to my own truth, I guess, and that is moving through the world as a human being and in the body that I'm in and through the life experiences that I'm in. So it is too expensive, at least filmmaking is, you know. So after I get done with this next film, I'll probably just write books, just me and my printer and my imagination. But I think what's really important is that the diversity of the Black experience in America is something that we still are attempting to speak to. And for me, because that's the form that I come in, that's important. That's valid. And so if you haven't found a body of work, I know it's there, but you're going to have to look for it, that speaks to you and your sister and your family. You can be that witness to that, right? As a theater performer, as a writer. But I think that's what is required at this stage in America. It's that all of our narratives, that the diversity narrative, even if you did watch the Oscars, because they kept talking about Oscars so white. So they had plenty of Black presenters. But I have a Filipino friend in my Facebook newsfeed speaking about how, well, why is the diversity narrative Black and white? Why isn't it inclusive of all the other ethnicities of color and experiences? Because that is still very much, you know, an issue as well. So I think at the root of what I do is to speak to the human condition as I see it, through the lens I experience it. And my work, you know, has Black characters, white space stars, a deaf actor from ABC Family switched at birth, Ryan Lane. So that's given me an opportunity to work quite a bit in the deaf community, which is a whole other community, which when I started that process, it was like, well, I can be frustrated as a Black actress who hears, who is verbal. What is it then to be a deaf performer or a Black deaf performer, or, you know, all of these other questions, again, of trying to fit in to what is mainstream, as opposed to saying, well, actually, many people exist on the margins. And I'm so interested in those stories, of your story, of the story of a white poet going into a seemingly Black venue, and you think he's, you know, having a mom's spaghetti M&M situation or something, only to realize his difference isn't his race, but the fact that he uses sign language to perform poetry instead of his voice. So write, create, speak up.
Thank you for telling your story.
Last question.
Okay, so I'm a big pop culture person, TV, film. And I guess I just want to know if any of you are watching Empire with Taraji P Henson, Terrence Howard, and if so, what's your thought about it? Dominic is shaking his head. So if you are shaking your head, just what are your thoughts about it? Just given some of the conversation that we've had about images of Black folks, what kind of responsibility do we have? Does it matter? Drinking the Kool-Aid, whatever. So just your thoughts about that.
Before Dominic goes, I'm going to say really quick. I used to be a real pop person, culture, top 40, everything I knew, and I've really just made a conscious choice to go, y'all are doing something new. And it probably has nothing to do with me. But I can respect the fact that those are the choices that you're making, because, as I always say, somebody had to say yes to that.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. It's so interesting and sad and amazing how this conversation lingers like through every year. I'm sure we could transport ourselves 40 years ago, 50 years ago, and we are having this same conversation, just with different artists who said yes. It's, for me, I've always been like, I did not watch Scandal for a bit. So that's me. I did not participate in that. I did not see The Butler. I did not see 12 Years a Slave. I have not participated in certain things for my own reasoning. But when I saw Taraji P Henson, I have to say, just as a graduate from an HBCU theater department, she went to Howard, and I've met her, and she's a phenomenal person, artist, and I've tuned in. And the first episode, I had a lot of judgment, and I literally saw pretty much every stock minstrel character in the first episode, even more than in some other shows, and even more than in Tyler Perry. But at the same time, I go back and forth with that, to tell you the truth. Yeah, I go back and forth because Cookie, the character that she plays, you can watch it or you won't. I think that she has a certain kind of power that, we are thirsty for, because there's nothing in the well on TV. And so we tune in because we want to see ourselves. So for me, I just have to pack up my historical movies and, remember my conversations with my grandmother, and then I can watch Cookie and try not to tear my soul. But some days, it really does. But I would add to that point, even speaking about Tyler Perry, it goes both ways, because, the same person that's putting out these characters that are stock characters are giving people opportunities to work, but also at the same time, flew Whitney Houston, who they allow her body to just stay in a hotel room for hours while they party, across the country back home to Orange, New Jersey. So the economic power that's also tied into this, I think, is something that we can't forget in these kinds of conversations. So it's more than just, do I like this show? Is what are these artists paving the way for? As you spoke about Hattie McDaniel. Is she in that conversation? Was she a Cookie, just in a different form? So I don't know.
I think one of the hard things is the economics. You mentioned it in film. It's also true in TV. I mean, it's a television show. So is it an art product? No. I mean, I actually. No, I mean, and I hate to use this. It is a television product. And years ago, I had a meeting with someone about writing on a soap opera, and they said to me, "You have to understand something. At the end of the day, we're trying to sell soap. That's what we're trying to sell." And I have an actor friend. I'm not going to mention his name because you could IMDb him. He was doing Cat on a Hot Tin Roof with Kathleen Turner in New York, and he's an actor. He's a trained actor, and he was Brighty. And his line was, "Storm's coming." So I fly into New York, and he says, "D, you don't understand. Storm's coming is letting the white world know about the coming civil rights movement." Tennessee Williams was really profound. Storm's coming and he had worked out all this inside actor stuff, which I love. I was like, beautiful, man, beautiful. I come back into town, they cut his line. I say, "Oh man, so what about the civil rights?" He said, "This is in the 80s. He said, "D, you know what this is? This is $875 a week. I got 2 daughters. This is $875. It's not that other thing. It is as if, and it's weird, it's as if you take the bartending job that you got and you make X amount of dough on it. You don't care about your performance in bar. It's that same positionality, but I'm on stage doing my craft." And I was like, well, that's kind of interesting. And this is the choice you make. Because he had 2 daughters he had to feed. And I understand it. That's a lot of times, and this is the sad thing that happens, we go to the actors to defend these things which are not defensible. And you can't tell an actor they can't make $1,500 or whatever they're making on Broadway, or goodness knows what they're making in TV and in film. You can't, I mean, they got to feed themselves. And I'm not in a place to do it. And I tell people all the time, even when I tell that Law and Order story, I was a person who had a graduate degree. Like, I had advantages available to me that if I was a single father with a kid and a high school degree, I couldn't have had. Because if I was a single father, I would have been back in there working on my bad, gun stance. You know what I mean? Because you got to do what you got to do. So I do think it is very complicated. And Empire does truck in all those images that are not necessarily progressive.
So I was just told we actually do have a little bit more time. So any other questions?
Hello. So there was a 2004-2005 play called Electricidad by a Chicano playwright named Luis Alfaro. My name is Isela. I'm Chicana. I'm from East LA. And I was really excited when I first learned that play had been published and produced. And this was about 2 years ago that I had heard about it. And then I realized after reading it that it had been staged at the Mark Taper Forum, not in East Los Angeles, not where I grew up. And then I realized that the audience that it had been staged for was a predominantly upper middle class, wealthy, older, empty nester white audience. So I got a little pissed off when I heard that and I was in North Carolina when I learned that this play existed. 8 years after this play had been staged, only maybe 10 miles from where I grew up. So my question is when we're talking about producing art that is about our stories and is about our families, and they then later did that play at Homeboy Industries, which is in East LA, which is a ministry based out of Father Greg Boyle's church. I don't know if you all know about them, and it has done amazing work for people who have been incarcerated, who have had a violent history, and there's so many layers and so many powerful avenues that this play has produced for these artists in the community that maybe not had seen themselves as artists before. At the same time, I realized that this play had been in a rolling premiere at the Goodman Theater in Chicago and the Mark Taper Forum and other spaces before it ever got back to Homeboy Industries. And then I go around reading reviews from the Chicago Tribune, just reproducing these images, these stereotypes about how immigrants are just, straight up violent, and it's giving insight into the real volatile nature of these aliens. So my question is, when we're producing these art, these spaces, these things that can be healing for ourselves, what do you think about the intentionality of where it is that we actually take those pieces of art and who it is that's in that audience and how it can be something super damaging depending on who's there or super uplifting and empowering depending on who's sitting there and taking on that art?
That's another one of those things that's unknown, because if you have an artist that's making, there's something that happens in the making of the art, especially if you're trying to tell or relate to a particular story or issue. If you're working on a play about people that are working who are incarcerated, but they're not able to come see the play because you can't take it to them, does that invalidate the power of it? There always is that thing about if I'm making something and I always call it making, if I'm working with people, what's the value that becomes inherent, not only for the artist, but for what that audience is. It takes a different kind of work and commitment from artists to go and be in the community that their stories are for. The industry, and that's why it's called show business, it's not about that. Yes, they want it to be, and so that's why they can promote. Yes, the Goodman will want to have those stories. August Wilson gets done all over the country. It's not done on the Lower East Side. It's not done in Chicago. If you go to the big theater, those stories are very valid. I was working with an artist who's a Filipino artist, and she's writing this great play about how the island got transformed because the Spanish came and then the Americans came, and it took a lot of work to try and find native Tagalog speakers who also knew that history. But when the audience came, I'm in Minnesota. So that's who showed up. We were able to actually go to some centers and bring people to this space. Fortunately, it was a theater that does that kind of human rights outreach, Pangea Theater. So they know what their audience is. A lot of those issues that when you have something that's volatile and valuable for a community, sometimes that community never sees it. No one's going to feel bad about it, except those of us that are aware of it. So the work that we get to do as the activist artist part is, why is this work not being seen in those spaces? The anger and the frustration that we feel, you have to do something with it. Because you can be pissed off as much as you want. What are you going to do with it? And I've already said that.
Yeah, but one of the things which is hard, because you're the audience misinterpreting the work. I don't know. I probably should say I know Luis as a really good guy, artist, person. Like, I know him, so that I should probably put that on the caveat of this statement I'm about to make. But I do think that that's one of the real kind of telling problematics about a lot of this work that's shown. I mean, even when people laud August Wilson, I say this all the time. I'm like, August Wilson did not do African American history. He did not. He did something. Troy Maxson in Fences wants to drive the garbage truck. In 1951 in New York City, a sister named Jane Wright helped develop the drug methotrexate to combat breast cancer. Her family was not engaged in any kind of notion of driving a garbage truck. Additionally, the fact that he's a failed baseball player allows a lot of white audiences to come in and say, oh, I understand that. And he doesn't want his son to play football. But why can't you go to college and not play football? W.E.B. Du Bois was a wonderful athlete whose father did not want him to play sports. Do you understand what I'm saying? But what Fences can allow people to do is it allows you to get into this box. And depending on whether that box is prison or that box is something else, there's all these other things. You can't control the audience that comes into the work. And I should probably, let me caveat this. What the Taper pays or what the large Lord theaters pay is impressive. I mean, it's shocking how much they pay compared to other theaters. And I do think that that's one of the things where it is, yeah, I mean, you can't say no to a thing. I was just, when Lynn Nottage was in town, we were talking about, what the Guthrie pays juxtaposed to what Penumbra pays. And I don't think, they're in the same town. They're both doing theater. I don't think anybody has an idea, like, how night and day that is. And I used to work at Penumbra for 7 years, so that's one of those things. So the question is, giving this information to an audience that doesn't understand the culture and the community, is that additionally damaging? I think that you have to keep trying to fight and bring in the right people in the space and try to do some stuff. But the money, the economics of that industry is really kind of tough. And I don't have an answer for it. But I do think that the artist should, and I know Luis does this, always try to engage the primary community, even as, he goes and deals in other communities.
I would say majority of my work in New York was doing exactly what you're speaking about. But I didn't have an expectation that the public would do that. The public is a larger theater in New York, similar to the Mark Taper. But some things that we tried to do when we worked in those larger institutional spaces was through writers, us extending our agency as best we can. So I was producing a writer, and so we just brought in our own make-ready community team into the theater structure, and we did the marketing to our people because we needed to see, her name is Mfani, so she's a phenomenal Nigerian playwright. We needed to see Nigerian people in the audience, as well as on the stage. They tried to just get any African American actor, if you have an accent or not, to play a Nigerian. So to me, it's our responsibility for me as an art maker, to do whatever I have to do. So if I'm going to work at the Mark Taper, I'm going to bring my own team, and that's going to be a part of my contract. So, and some people, like writers like Lynn Nottage, and, these people can do it way probably better than me. But even if people have to come in and volunteer, it's just that question again, what are we willing to do? what are we willing to do when we are on stage and we see an audience of people? Not to say that all people can't take in all kinds of art, but that you see a whole community of people that don't look like the people on stage at all. Like, do you stop? Do you say, you know what? We'll do it again tomorrow. I need to see something different. What do we do? You know, do we say, you know what? Maybe it's not this theater space we're supposed to be in. Let's go somewhere else. You know, where are the people? And I think that people like Amir Baraka, like calling all black people, this is what he was doing. You know, so sometimes we put things in isolation and we expect for people to run to us. That's what I think theater does. When, you know, people have a lot of other cool stuff going on, and they might not see that play, but, you know, a sister that does this type of work in prisons, one of my mentors, Rodessa Jones. She goes and has this project called the Medea Project, where she goes into prisons in the United States and in South Africa working with women that have been put in prison because of domestic violence, enacted on them from their partners, but they're in prison because some of them killed their partners or whatever, got into, you know, verbal things, drugs, different things. She works within the prison system. And she, you know, takes them out, and then they do this play. But the stark reality is they have to go back. You know, so we're always dealing in complexities. So we will be probably continuing to have that conversation of this play at the Mark Taper Forum, and it's an all-white middle-class audience. But the art piece is the only, you know, people of color in that room. And what do we do? And to me, that's the $1 million question. But we all know the solution. And that's, to me, the messed up part about theater. Because similar to diversity, all of these kind of initiatives, we know some things that we can do. Put different thought into the space by way of thinking and also bodies. But we don't do it. So I think that these are the questions that we have to ask ourselves. Why aren't we shifting? Why aren't we shifting? Why aren't we shifting these spaces? You know, so you just got to do your place where you play, where you want to do it, with the people you want to do it with, and put them in the play. Maybe that's a way.
Please help me thank our esteemed panel of discussions. Harry, Maya, Dominic, Aaron, thank you so much for dropping knowledge on us today and really participating in a really critical conversation around the black arts and the ways in which we can be advocates through the arts, whether or not that's our role or not. Some people choose to do that. And to Aaron's point, I think it's a conversation that I think we can continue, and I love the part two. Blowing our minds with blackness. Yeah. So thank you again for participating. And Ann, do you have any closing remarks? Nope. All right. Have a good afternoon. Yeah, have a good afternoon and a great weekend.